What's up, guys? Zeus here, back with another video. Quick reminder, if you are watching, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more of me and my content. And in today's video, we are going to be going over what characters should spawn in what areas. And before it gets complicated, this is going to be just a general thing. Like, this is going to be just a rescuer spawn. Rescuer should typically spawn here. Kiter should typically spawn here. The weaker decoder character should typically spawn here on any designated team comp. That is the overall consensus of this. And I'm doing this because I was in the middle of making the spawn selection guide, and I realized the spawn selection guide is only as useful as people's what's the word, perceptions of what character should be spawning where. So it's like, I can tell you where to spawn, but if you're running something like an explorer, a postman, a prisoner, and a gravekeeper for whatever damn reason, and then you decide, okay, well, I know where to spawn, but you don't know who to put where, kind of thing. And yes, people are going to be like, well, this might be common sense, blah 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 blah. Yeah, well, clearly to everyone it is not common sense, which is why I'm making the video, so that way I can make it more clear. Now, granted, obviously certain things can be up to change depending on the hunter, but we're going to be ignoring all of that for the most part. This is just going to be general rules of thumb. This is like the most like broad of like what characters should be spawning where, assuming this is just your average ranked match and nothing else. So with that being said, we're going to go through this. We have 3 tiers right here. We have spawn in dangerous areas, which is pretty much like dead areas that you wouldn't like really have anyone else spawn. You have spawn in kiting areas, which is self-explanatory. And we have spawn in the strongest areas, which is just like shit like hospital and factory, for example. Those are like where you want to put your weakest characters 9 times out of 10, simply because they are, as I said, weak. So, assuming this is rank meta and this is always composition, we're going to assume there's always going to be 1 rescuer, 2 kiters, and then 1 like weaker kiter slash decoder. So, for always spawning in dangerous areas, I think this is pretty self-explanatory, but rescuers always spawn in the most dangerous parts of the map. Mercenary, where's journalist? Journalist, who else? Grave, officer, coordinator. Yeah, these characters always spawn within the, and aeroplanes as well. These characters will always spawn in the most dangerous areas. Pretty much, if you're a rescuer, you are going to be spawning in middle. And I'm gonna just open up MS Paint right here because I have this shit open right here. If you are a rescuer, you are always spawning in your designated middle area right here. You're always going to be in middle. The only exception to this is Sacred Heart Hospital, because obviously the center of the map is the hospital, and hospital is the strongest part of the map. So obviously you don't want your rescuer spawning in hospital. So if it's hospital, you would spawn 1 down, which would be right at birdcage, which is the next best thing to like being in middle, since there's like close to nothing there. But hospital's a really survivor-sided map, so there's always going to be something. But regardless, any other map, your rescuer spawns in mid. For the sole exception of hospital, your rescuer spawns 1 below hospital. 1 below, which would be down here. This would be where your rescuer would spawn in hospital. Those are the only spawns that should be allowed. So now we have spawning in kiting areas. So kiting areas we know, so I'm gonna just, I close MS Paint just to like reopen it again. But we have areas for, let's say, arms factory. We have shack, we have factory, we have deep sandbags, we have locker, even for areas that our kiters typically would want to be spawning. So your kitering characters, you know, obviously your characters that are not weak should be spawning in these areas. So characters, entomologist, painter, prospector, enchantress, acrobat, not postman, batter, magician, priestess, cowboy, seer, embalmer, merchant, psych, patient, I just reversed that, novelist, little girl, weeping professor, weeping clown, cheerleader, barmaid, antiquarian. Pretty much half of the kiting rosters in this character. If we really want to like dive into tournament meta as well, lucky guy and gardener, because they're not that weak. Dancer, perfumer. these are characters that you should be spawning in these kiting areas. So if you're on let's say Chinatown, for example, you have your rescuer set to spawn in middle. You would have then one of your plethora of kiting characters to spawn at hotel, to spawn at connected, to spawn at restaurant, etc. You know, just your kiting area. You want your kiters to be set in good kiting areas, and that's really it. That's baseline. You don't want to just spawn them anywhere and throw them anywhere that they can't effectively use their abilities given to them to actually kite the hunters. Otherwise, you're just sabotaging yourself. You're hurting yourself more often than not. So now we have characters that are supposed to spawn in the strongest areas. So the strongest areas of every map are, you know, your factories, your hospitals, your shacks. Well, not so much shack, but mainly your hospital and your factories. That's it. Pretty much the hospital and factory of every map, where is typically speaking your weakest characters should be spawning at. Characters that have close to no self-preservation skills, characters that most of the time are decoders because the decoders close to have no self-preservation skills, characters with like maybe kiting debuffs of some sort and whatnot, or characters overall that just can't survive without support in some fashion and just rely solely on raw kiting and nothing more. So these are your characters like lawyer, for example, lawyer, doctor, thief, explorer, mechanic, mind's eye, postman, prisoner, composer. Okay, yeah, actually, I'm gonna move thief up here because thief has some kind of self-preservation with the flashlight, moonwalking, tricky bullshit, but whatever. Point being, these are your characters that should be spawning in these broken areas because they have little to no self-preservation skills at all. And if they do have self-preservation skill, because I know a lot of people are going to look at Postman and say, but Postman has the dog and he has the letters. Postman dog, it has too long of a cooldown. It doesn't do much for you anymore in a meta of speed demon hunters with opera singer, night watch, etc. Wax artist, even to an extent, who's being played less, I guess, but still used relatively well. It's just not good for him. Like the dog doesn't help him in this meta of like speed demons. So yes, Postman is here for that reason. Like even if it's minimal self-preservation, minimal is not enough. It just blatantly is not enough. You need characters like Dancer, who can like set up boxes to keep infinite loops going. Painter, who I think is really underrated, who has paintings that literally forcibly move the hunter. Even Enchantress, who has like just stacks just for existing. Acrobat, really good, like cheerleader. Characters like these do not compare to characters like these. Now, you might look at Embalmer and wonder, why is Embalmer in spawn in kiting areas instead of spawn in strongest areas? And the reason why I put him there is because Embalmer's kind of he's kind of a finicky character, more or less, because Embalmer can do whatever. He runs Sui build, but I can see why, you know, Embalmer, obviously he has no self-preservation skills. So it's like Embalmer, like this isn't, you know, obviously this isn't ordered before any of you like come at me, but Embalmer just, he lives within these two areas. He lives between both tiers simply because, just to again dive into a little bit more of the competitive scene, Embalmer in competitive is way more flexible than Embalmer in rank. And Embalmer in rank, yes, you always spawn here. You always are in the strongest area. So if you're an Embalmer in rank, you are always going to be spawning in your factory, your for Moonlit, your 2-story, for Sacred Heart, your hospital. You're always going to be spawning there, no matter what. If it's tourney, different story, but it's not tourney. For rank, he's always spawning in those areas. So yeah, I'm just going to keep Embalmer here. So again, for recap, spawn in dangerous areas. These are your middle areas, your areas that are dead, that are pretty much like suicide for you to spawn in if you're anyone else but a rescuer, which should be these characters spawning in those general areas. For a broad rule of thumb, again, composition to composition, it is subject to change, but this is just a broad thing. I'm emphasizing the broad because I know people are going to ask questions of like, well, what if my composition is this? It's subject to change based on composition. This is just a general rule of thumb. This is like a broadest of broad, so you know that if I'm playing a rescue character, I should probably spawn in middle. If I'm playing a kiting character, I should probably not spawn in middle. If you have strategies or different compositions, subject to change. But this is just broad. This is just like the tip of the iceberg. If we would dive into it, we would have like dancers spawn in dangerous areas because we would be thinking of dancer box support in middle, like in Red Church or in Chinatown, even something along those lines, you know? Like, but we're not. We're taking that out. We're just thinking general basis, and then we develop and work our way down bit by bit. So yes. You have your characters who should always be spawning in mid slash the pretty much suicide areas. You have your characters that should be spawning in the kiting areas of the map. So you know, if you're again on Arms Factory, you have your characters that should be spawning in deep sandbags and shack, and if it's hospital, you know, your ruins, your statue, your shack, etc. You have those characters that should always be spawning there. And then you have your characters that should always be spawning in the strongest areas, your characters that are always weak and that like have little to no self-preservation at all, so should be spawning in factory, in hospital, in middle, in 2 stories, you know, characters that should always be spawning here. Alright guys, that is going to be the end of the video. I hope you all did enjoy this little short video on you know, just explaining the general basis of where characters should be spawning. Now, this is obviously going to be linked to the spawn selection guide, so watch the spawn selection guide and watch this video in whichever order you choose. I would suggest personally watching the spawn selection guide, because once you have a clear understanding of where should you be spawning, it's easier to put into practice of, okay, I know where I should be spawning, what character do I main, and where should I be spawning now according to this. And again, I'm going to stress again, this is something broad. This is not like hyper specific. If you're running some kind of hardcore specific comps, this is just a general basis. It's always subject to change based on your composition. But again, this is, you know, a team-based game. So, you know, if you have a team, your ranked randoms, like, you can always discuss a matter of where people could be spawning. I'm again making this because I've gotten too many you know, people who are down here spawning where people up here should be spawning. So, you know, I would really I really want that to change. But with all that being said, I hope you all did enjoy the video. I'm Zeus and I'm out. Peace out, everyone. Love you all.